Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here. It's Friday afternoon. You've been at this for a long time, and we're just so glad that you've chosen to spend this time with us. We're here for standards off-the-shelf, CCRS, and core curriculum textbooks. I am Liddy Rich. I teach online these days through Metro East Harmony Learning Center in Maplewood.
And yeah, welcome everyone. I'm Dan Bruski, and I'm teaching intermediate ESL at Adult Options in Hopkins.
So we were asked to do this workshop using the standards, using our off-the-shelf textbooks. And I want to start out with the obvious questions. Why standards and why off-the-shelf? So, I've talked to plenty of colleagues, maybe even one of you. And, I hear all kinds of things about the standards. They're cumbersome, they're busy work, they're ambiguous, they're frustrating. And maybe those things, there might be something to some of those things, but, frankly, what I've discovered is that the more I spend time with the standards, the more they actually make me a better teacher. They really help me to focus on being really intentional about what I'm teaching and being really intentional about what is going to help my students learn. So call them what you want. But we're going to spend some time being really focused and helping you to focus on the things that will help your learners get a little bit stronger in their language skills in all the ways. The off-the-shelf part, Dan and I had a wonderful opportunity to be on the Minnesota team last summer at a national conference called Standards and Actions 2.0, and it was focused on what's the next steps. We've all been doing standards work in all the states in lots of different ways. And many of us, I know many of you have done a lot of classes through Atlas, through various things in Minnesota, doing the standard, but we were looking at a new way of approaching it. We spent about a week focused on the Declaration, no, not the Declaration, the Gettysburg Address, which is a wonderful text. And we did all kinds of activities, and we left there saying, well, how could we use these activities in more of the everyday way that we are teaching? Because we're not going to be teaching the Gettysburg Address, or if we do, we're going to do that once. And then what do we do the rest of the time? So we've taken a bunch of those fabulous activities, and we've tried to apply them to things that we use every day. And I think that we've come up with some good things, so we're happy to share them with you. We hope that when you leave here today, you will have some new ideas, some new things to test out, things that you can use to prepare learners for reading a text, ways to engage learners in a variety of reading experiences, and to enrich all of your lessons with CCRS-based activities.
Great. So the first thing we want to know is, what are your favorite off-the-shelf teaching resources? And we're going to get a Mentimeter started. There are two ways to interact with this Mentimeter. One, if you want to use your cell phone, you can just aim it at that QR code, and it will open up a website, and you can enter your what you want to write there, or you can use the link that's in the chat that Rob is putting in the chat. And you'll have the opportunity to add your top 2 off-the-shelf resources. What are the books that you are going to? So I'll give you a little bit to work on that, and I'll start pulling up the results.
There's a question Danielle asked, off the shelf, do you mean regular textbooks? Really any textbook, anything that you grab when you aren't quite sure what's coming up next. So there are lots of great things coming up. I love how these Mentimeters change and grow. So we'll give you another moment or so.
Right. I suppose the definition of textbook is kind of expanded these days to not just things that are printed. And I see some people, the answers are reflecting that.
So while you're adding more things, would love to hear some of the things. What do you notice so far? We've got this up on the screen. What do you notice about the things that are coming up here? What do you see here? You put your answers into the chat. Yeah, there's a lot of variety, absolutely. Yeah, so Penny said Ventures is used in many places. Penny, how do you know that Ventures is used in many places? What do you see that makes you say that? Somebody commented, not everything's in print. Aha, so the word Ventures is larger and bolder, right? So one of the things that we noticed in this WordCloud, in this, in the Mentimeter poll, is that some of the words are big and some of the words are bigger and some of the words are smaller. And we're gonna come back to that a little bit later. So this is great. Thanks for sharing your ideas. You can keep adding to that. And Dan, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, sounds good. It's kind of amazing that we have so many resources out there in our field, and it's I don't know. To me, it feels like it's kind of a perk of our profession in a way that there's so much opportunity for programs to make choices and individuals to make choices and use their creativity. And I've used a lot of those resources on that list, to tell you the truth. Today, we're going to focus on one of them, and it happened to be one of the ones that was mentioned in the WordCloud. We're going to be using this Ventures, and we're going to be looking at some examples from a chapter in Ventures, and we're going to be looking at the first edition. It looks like they're on the third edition now. Also of note, we're going to be looking at level 2. And although we think that the strategies and the activities should be applicable to other levels and other core texts, it's not venture-centric by any means. And we're going to be going through a unit that's on shopping, because pretty much every core text has something about shopping. And this one is about shopping for household items. So we're just going to do a quick walkthrough of this chapter. You don't really have to see this. I know it's really small, but so the Ventures usually opens up with some kind of scaffolding visual. And I think most core texts do have some sort of interesting visual to talk about at the beginning to kind of get people thinking about what's coming. And Ventures has a listening task and a short reading text. There's always a grammar focus in Ventures, and a lot of these core texts will have something like that. This one happens to be about adjectives, comparative and superlative adjectives, comparing items. And there's a short writing task, and they usually end up with a summative task that looks a lot like a CASAS test. Anyone who's gone through the CCRS implementation cohort will remember something called the high value action tool. And this is something that we used in the cohort to evaluate resources, print resources, websites, YouTube channels, vis-a-vis their strength in CCRS. And one of our ABE colleagues did an evaluation for Ventures 2. So I just highlighted a couple of the strengths and weaknesses here. So the strengths that they saw of this particular title is that there were several relevant lines of inquiry, different themes. And I think that's typical of core text. It does have practice in all those language domains. And they also highlighted that there's a supplemental resource, a worksheet that's specifically CCRS. Some of the weaknesses they noticed were that there is no explicit focus on close reading and little opportunity to develop response writing or argumentative writing. And there were fewer authentic nonfiction reading texts than they would have wanted. Personally, some of the strengths I appreciate about having a book like this as kind of the backbone of my course is that it really keeps me on target, and it helps me make sure that I'm hitting a variety of skills. I'm not going forever on grammar or reading. I'm making sure I'm hitting a lot of skills. And it also kind of helps me not dwell on one topic for too long. So eventually I got to move along. It's like, okay, it's time to move on to the next topic. So I appreciate that about core text. Okay, what's a Swiss Army knife have to do with the core curriculum text? It's a metaphor, sorry. So the Swiss Army knife is like one small resource that can do a lot of things, right? And same with the core text, right? It's doing a whole lot of things, but at the same time, it has its limitations. Like if I want to chop down a tree, I'm gonna need a bigger saw. And if I'm at home, I'm gonna use a different can opener or different scissors. Same with the core text. Basically, if we're gonna attempt to do bigger things, we're going to need different tools because, I'm not gonna go camping without my Swiss Army knife. I'm also not gonna do my ESL class without having a nice backbone core text, but we're gonna need different tools to do bigger jobs. Metaphor complete. Okay, and the tools in this case are actually strategies. So some of the strategies we're gonna look at are tapping into students' funds of knowledge and making predictions and preparing for the content. And you can see down below, we've made note of the CCRS standards that we think are being addressed by these skills, by these activities. Secondly, we're gonna add more of that focus on close reading. We're gonna try to go deeper with the texts that are already in here, in this book. And in addition to that, maybe we can find some other texts or what people are calling paired texts. So find some relatable and related authentic texts for close reading and maybe a little bit of response writing or speaking. So we hope you'll find some things that you can take away when you pull a book off the shelf. So the first we're going to look at is some paired text. And if you've been to CCRS Atlas workshops, especially those focused on beginning levels, you'll know that anything that students are getting information from is text. So it could be videos or audio or photographs or visuals like these. So the chapter comes with a nice visual, has a lot going on in it. And so that we have that text, and maybe we might pair it with another text to get students to generate that vocabulary and get ready for the rest of the chapter. There's going to be sometimes today we're going to ask you to put on your student hat and participate in some of these activities as a student, and then we'll have time to reflect on it with your teacher hat on too. So a way to hear what students are thinking and what they know about a topic and to provide opportunities for them to share their ideas is to do this picture talk. And I think a lot of people do this type of picture talk activity. In fact, if you get a chance, Mara did a good take and bake session yesterday. If there's a video recording of it, she did some good stuff with picture talks. So the first one, I think a lot of people do this one. Who is in the photo, talking about who is in the image. And sometimes I might just have the students shout out and I'll write it on the board and what the students are doing. And in an online class, I'll write it right on the picture. Or another way we do it is using the chat box. And so maybe the students are saying, okay, what are the people doing? He's shopping, he's testing how comfortable it is, he's sitting, he's looking. This is also an opportunity to ask for evidence too. If someone says he's shopping at IKEA, you say, okay, how do you know it's IKEA? What's your evidence? So they can point to that, say, oh, I recognize that price tag, or I have that chair. So what's your evidence that for the things that you're saying? Actually, I would like you all to open up the chat box and do that, put on the student hat. And I would like you to, for the next, let's say 30 seconds, respond to this prompt. So please use the chat box and respond to the prompt. Who is not in the photo?
Many people are saying that there's no women, there's no salesperson, no kids. Somebody said, I'm not in it. Me, people, let's see, no employees are here. What else? Lots of women, lots of kids. No sales clerk. Yep, great.
Lovely. Great.
Yep.
Thanks. Nice
No
work.
Native American people, no babies. It's unlike IKEA to see no other customers. There's no store security. No animals. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Super. All right. Let's do another question too. One more prompt for you, students. Please use the chat box and respond to the following prompt. What question can you write about the photo? Or maybe, what do you want to know about the photo?
Lots of great questions already. Are these two men together? How expensive is the chair? Why does the man on the left look unhappy? What are they looking for? Is the chair expensive? Is this a fair price for the chair? What are they thinking and how would you know? Are they brothers? Why is he looking on his phone? What is he looking at on his phone? Why does the man in the green chair look disgusted by the price tag?
All right, these are great. You can imagine how these questions would generate some interesting conversation. Great, nice work. Let's go. Let's sort of debrief on these questions all together. So as you probably noticed, the questions are getting, maybe a little more complex as you go along. Like the first one is, there's only so many answers, maybe. There's sort of a domain of answers, who is in the photo. Same with what are they doing? There's maybe a little more that people could say there. The third question, well, yeah, let's go to, but the third question is kind of interesting. This one is new for me. Who is not in the photo it's kind of interesting because you're always looking for who's not there. It's kind of a way of training ourselves to start being aware of what isn't present. And just getting used to that question could be applicable in other types of reading, other types of text, like what is not mentioned. Like, okay, this text talked about this, but what did they leave out? What could be there? I like that one. And then the questions, it could be used as a kind of a prediction, what's coming up, and maybe confirming those predictions. Not with this text. This text isn't particularly complex, and there's not going to be any answer to those questions because I just pulled it off an IKEA website. But imagine if you're using a photo to, like a historical photo or a photo with a current events text or something, then maybe they would be able to confirm some of those questions. But even though this isn't very complex, you can see how it might prepare students for what's coming up, all the tasks that are going to be coming up in this chapter. We thought maybe another way to do this would be with on Jamboard, because the chat box is kind of limited, isn't it? Because the answers kind of disappear pretty quick. But when we've got the Jamboard, they can look at each other's answers. And I just attended Penny Brown's session about sorting, and I'm starting to think maybe there's a way after we've done this, we could sort words in logical ways and do some critical thinking there too. I always get something from language and literacy. And maybe once we've done that, we have all that language, we could possibly let's caption this photo. What are we going to do? And I think of captioning as kind of a sneaky way of saying, what's the main idea of this picture? Like and maybe students would have their own ideas of what a caption would be, and we could do some thinking about what would be the best caption for this. So those are all for a paired text. And the original visual text here on the right, labeled picture B, we could do any of those activities with the original text instead, or with the paired text, or do both of them. I guess the paired text on the left is a little simpler, and the picture B has a lot more going on. So maybe we do the simpler one first, I don't know. But we could also make some comparisons. So when I've done this in class, I haven't handed the Venn diagram to my online class, but I have them shout out answers to me. So I say, what's the same? Oh, they're shopping. Oh, what's different? And I just sort of write them on the Venn diagram, and we get all the language and talking about it, and ask them why this one, explain why they said their answers. And then from there, then maybe I could hand it over to them to talk about it. And I put them in a small group maybe to talk about what's same and what's different. So I wouldn't necessarily give them the Venn diagram, depends on where they are, at least not the first time around. But at this point, they have all the language, and maybe the vocabulary won't be so difficult at this point, but the oral task, or if this is a written task, this could be the focus now. So I think this is a good way to sort of prepare students for what's coming up next, because they're going to be talking about these images, or at least the image on the right actually is going to be associated with the rest of the text a little bit. So moving on to another activity about close reading. So the Ventures text does have some short reading texts in it, and with some comprehension questions. But the comprehension questions they're a little bit what people are calling right there questions, meaning you could look at the question and just go, oh, the answer is right there, right? What did Sammy buy? A van. And so the answer is kind of right there. So maybe we could, for the same text, we could write some deeper questions, some questions that have them understand the text more, get some main idea, or talk about individual words. And Liddy's going to be focusing more on the vocabulary and words a little bit later. And while Liddy and I were preparing this session, I kind of had a little bit of an aha moment with this. We're trying to think about, okay, how can we do more close reading with what's here in this chapter? And I started thinking about how in these grammar dialogues, sometimes a student might get the pattern and just might kind of buzz through it, right? Like they see the word new, oh, the newest, good, the best, big, the biggest, teacher, I'm done. And they won't really have a chance to really understand what's going on in the text and not really think about it. And of course, it's a dialogue, so of course we could have students read through it as partners. But my aha moment is actually there's a lot here. This could become a close reading text. We could still like do all those activities, but then add another layer of having them go in and look really close at what's going on in this text. So we could say, okay, what's the main idea? We could talk about what the characters are thinking, and point to their evidence, like which store is probably the most popular. They might say, oh, I think it's Mega Store. Well, okay, tell me why. Show me your evidence. How do you know that? And they'd have to point to, oh, it's always busy, or it's always crowded. Sorry. Oh, sorry. It's a superlative adjective. It's the most crowded. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to trying to figure out how to do some more close reading with texts that weren't meant to be close reading texts. And another kind of paired text I played with a little bit last year. Some colleagues and I were trying to think about how to bring more community into our students' lives, especially when we're all locked up at home. And we came to ideas like Facebook Marketplace and Nextdoor. And if you don't know what Nextdoor is, it's kind of like a Facebook for neighborhoods, where people are selling things, buying things, giving advice, gossiping, telling about coyote sightings, and asking about why the police were at their corner that day, and any kind of thing. And whatever you think about the value of social media and Nextdoor, it's definitely authentic. and this is how people are communicating. So this is a paired text. We thought we would bring in something that's similar to what we're doing in the Ventures text, but with some more authentic text. So in the Ventures text, they're looking at comparing, okay, the blue chair is smaller than the orange chair. The orange chair is more comfortable than the blue chair. So once we've done all these practice, then I'm ready to add this paired text and do something authentic, like a beautiful Nichols and Stone dining room table. And I did make the choice to change the name and try to obscure the picture for this, by the way. So this was really interesting to go through, because there's a lot of vocabulary that definitely wouldn't appear in Ventures. I mean, there's some crossover, but there's some new adjectives. There's a chance to look at the numbers, like what do these numbers mean? There's abbreviation. And we get to talk a little bit, just looking at the words, but also just describing the picture and the table. It says 6 chairs. Why are there only 4? Interesting. And then, of course, then we can make a comparison with another table. This one has a little bit less information in it. My students had some opinions about this one, for sure, compared to the other one. And so now that we have these 2 tables, we get to go shopping. And actually, before we go shopping, actually, let's just talk about making comparisons. And can I ask you all to put on your student hat again and write a comparative sentence between table A and table B. I don't know if you remember the price and whatnot for these, but you can definitely look at the visual things. Or chair A and chair B. And just use the chat box and write some sentences comparing them just to get this experience. You could use any of the categories: price, comfort, looks, age, weight, or your own ideas. That's fine.
Let's see. Somebody said table A is more beautiful than table B. Table A is more formal than table B.
Nice.
The top of table A is oval shaped and the top of table B is rectangular. It's another way of comparing, right?
Right.
Both wooden tables have 4 chairs. I love the use of both there. Table A is more expensive than table B. Table A looks nicer than table B. The chairs with table A match the table better. Great. Another really nice different structure on the comparison than we often are teaching. Table B has more comfortable, table B chairs are more comfortable than table A chairs.
Great.
Table A has a darker stain than table B. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's great. I just realized I could sort of keep an eye on the chat while doing all this too. But anyway, so now we have we have all this language, right? Like, look at you thought of all these different ways to compare these tables. And this is where we can maybe get into a little bit of argumentative speaking or writing, because we have a lot of the language ready, because we've gone through this whole chapter and now we've made some comparisons between the tables. Now let's make our argument. You know, which table is better, or which table do you prefer for your home? Do you want table A or table B? But also now you can say why. And it might be using those comparisons, and it might just be, you know, this one fits in my kitchen, this one doesn't. But then the students are ready to make those arguments and have something to back them up. Speaking or writing, depends on what you're doing. Yeah, so I hope some of these activities that were based on ventures will give some ideas that are applicable to whatever core text you might be using. And, you know, there are lots of different ways to do authentic paired texts, or paired visuals, and maybe to get a little bit of response writing and speaking. And maybe you can find some ways to find areas for close reading in new places, right? Adding more text-dependent questions to places you wouldn't expect them to be otherwise. So I'm gonna hand it over to Liddy right now, and she's gonna tell us about another, it's kind of a paired text for ventures in itself, because we decided to do also on shopping.
Yeah, so we're gonna focus on a paired text, like Dan said, that's also about shopping. And this comes from the change agent. And if you're not familiar with the change agent, I just wanna put a big plug out for it. The change agent is, it's a magazine. It comes out twice a year, and it's a collection of student writing. And the thing that's, you know, different than something like Journeys or other anthologies is that each edition is focused on a theme. And so over the years, they've had things like mental health or hair or Indigenous people. A couple years back, there was one about play. One about talking about race or food, and recently, of course, the pandemic. It's now only, they used to have them in print. They are now only digital. It's only $30 a year, and for a teacher to share with their class, and I highly recommend it. So I'll give you that link later. It's in the handout that you'll get, but take a look at it. I think it's a great publication. So we're going to be focusing, as Dan said, on a possible paired text to go along with a shopping unit, although this one is not about furniture. So also, I'm going to focus on some of the same categories of ideas that Dan focused on, but we're going to hit on some different ways of getting at that. So we'll tap into students' funds of knowledge and vocabulary with predictions with vocabulary predictions to get them ready for content. Also focusing on deep reading with some other strategies. And I want to say, you know, that I also start with pictures and more because I've been working with Dan, and I recently added that question about what isn't in this picture, and I had its great response. We were looking at a picture of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King at the Montgomery bus boycott, and so I had the students talking about, you know, who's there and then who isn't there, and they noticed that there were no children, and very quickly they also noticed that there were no masks in the picture. And I said, oh, great, so what does that tell us about this picture? They said, well, that means it's not today, it's not happening now. And it's one of those great things because we have talked about it a little bit before, and so they're ready for that. And the more we get ready for those noticings of what isn't there, I think it's it enriches what we see. And I think it helps make us all better critical readers, critical viewers, and all of those things. So let's move on. We're going to be making predictions with a word cloud. So it's partly why we started out with our word cloud earlier. And the word cloud, the word cloud was new for my students. So, you know, I asked, you know, how did you know that many people like ventures, you know, earlier today, or use ventures, but my students did not have an idea of how to get information out of a word cloud. So we started out by doing something similar to what we did today. It wasn't very successful, but it was still useful in building something together. But what I've been doing then is teaching, explicitly teaching how to read a word cloud. So we're going to look at a word cloud in a moment. And these are some of the questions that I ask my students. You know, look at the size of the words and which words have the biggest letters. And I have to be really clear. I'm not talking about the words with the most letters, not the longest words, but look at the size of the letter. Look how tall are the letters? How big are they? So we're looking at the size. The words with the biggest letter in the text that we're going to look at is actually in the text 7 times. So which words in the text are in the text? Which words in the cloud are in the text the most? The words with the smallest letter are just in the text once. Which words are in the text the least? So I'm going to predict that when I show you the word cloud in a moment, you'll be able to figure those parts out really quickly. And what I want you all to focus on are the last 2 questions. And the next question is, what words are connected to each other and how are they connected? And I'm looking for any kind of connection. So in what ways, what words are connected? How are they connected? And finally, what do you think this text is about? So if you drop the questions into the chat, thank you. Here is the word cloud, and take a look. I'll give you a moment to look. There it is. So what words are connected, or what do you think this text might be about?
Shopping, pandemic supplies or lack of hoarding, the early days of the pandemic, pandemic anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Shopping during the pandemic, anxiety-induced retail therapy.
Great.
COVID scarcity, early days.
Yeah, these are great predictions. This was a bit more challenging, as you might guess, for my students. But still, I think it was a great way to start seeing these words, start saying these words. As a teacher, making a word cloud was a great way for me to also really, really clearly see what are the words that I have to make sure I help my students out with in the beginning. So hoarding was absolutely a new one, and also consequently kind of jumped out at me. I knew a lot of the other words were closer to words that they've experienced before. Any words that you see that are connected to each other, and how are they connected? Do we see any of those comments in there?
Okay,
Oh,
hand,
yeah.
touch, and sanitizer. Somebody just says the words in general are unsettling. Panic and hoarding. Oh, okay. Wear and mask go together. Think and need.
Yep.
Worry, panic, enough. There are categories of items.
Yeah.
Buying and hoarding.
Great. And in my classroom, I would spend time circling them, drawing lines between them, getting students to use their words to explain more about what those connections are. Sometimes there are words that are opposites of each other. Sometimes in other word clouds, I've had opposites, or I've had words that go together to explain something. I had a department and a store, and somebody put it together as a department store, and that was great. So it's a good way to sort of get the words out there without having to make a whole lot of meaning. There's definitely making the meaning of the words, but it's not telling a story quite yet. And we will come back to this. So we'll see. I like it as a quick introduction to the text, but then also we'll come back to it a little bit later. The title of the text, as you all were able to make some good predictions there. The title of the text is Hoarding is Contagious, and you'll get a copy of that in just a couple minutes. So the next thing that we're going to do as a way to really engage with the text is using some metacognitive practices. So I love the word metacognitive. It just, I like saying it. It has a good feel in my mouth. And it's really about thinking about thinking. And when I use this with my students, we often talk about what are we thinking about, how are we thinking about our thinking. When I use this strategy, I call it stop and think. So the goal of this is to really help slow down our process in thinking and to articulate how we are thinking about what we are reading and stopping to figure out what do I understand and what do I not understand, or what do I not understand quite yet. I'm going to give you an opportunity to do this and read the text. And I'll say, in real life, in my classroom, I would, on first read, I would either have my students read independently and then I would read it to them, or maybe the other way around. So I wouldn't do this activity until we've gone through it at least once, maybe twice, gotten some of the surface level, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? Understanding kind of at a sentence level before doing this. I'm going to ask you to jump in on perhaps the third read and ask you to catch up pretty quickly. I think you'll be able to do it. So I'm going to show you these different the different practices, the metacognitive practices, and so you'll notice that that each one comes with a statement of what I can do. This says, I'm going to summarize my understanding so far. Then there are a couple of sentence starters that students can use to begin to talk about what their ideas are. All of these will be in your handout, so I just want you to take a look at them now to get prepared and get your brain ready. This one says, I'm going to use my prior knowledge to help me understand. Next, I'm going to apply related concepts and/or readings. And finally, I'm going to think about what the selected text may mean. So when we're going to put you into breakout rooms in a moment, and I've got the instructions here, but you'll also get the instructions on the document that we'll give you in a moment. So what we're going to ask you to do is this. One person is going to start by reading the first paragraph out loud. Then choose any of these 4 metacognitive practices. Please say what you're going to do out loud. So read the statement, the what I can do statement. Don't just think it in your head, say it out loud. That's part of the important part of this. And then choose one of the sentence starters and then finish the sentence. You're going to repeat this procedure until you get through with different people reading different parts. You can test out a couple things. You could have a couple people add in their ideas from different ones of the practices on each paragraph, but try and see what it feels like, see what you notice about how it feels doing the activity, and then also how it might feel. What do you think, how it would go with your students? When we get back, we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about how you experienced it, and I'll show you how I've adapted it for my classroom, because I haven't done it exactly in this way, but I do think that it's worth practicing it out in this way. We've also given you some questions in the handout that ask you to just do some reflecting on all of the things that we've kind of thrown at you so far today. The visual ideas that Dan used to get us started in getting us prepared, the looking for the other places to engage in deeper reading, and all of the ideas. So they're in there. So spend some time in your group. We're going to give you about 10 minutes and then or maybe 12 minutes altogether. To spend some time doing this activity, you can wear, as Dan says, your student hat and your teacher hat, and then we'll come back a little bit after that.
So please find the document in the chat, open up that document and take a look at it, and we'll be setting up some breakout groups for you.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I just want to confirm how much time you guys want. 10 minutes with a minute to come back?
I think we're doing pretty well on time, so let's go closer to 12.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'm going to do 11 minutes, but then everyone will have a minute to come back. You don't have to come back
Perfect.
right away. And off you go. Let me know if you have any trouble.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope that was useful and helpful for you. I'd love to hear about your experience with the sentence frame. So if you could think about, do a little bit of metacognitive thinking here. How did that go for you? What was your experience using the sentence frames to think about the text? And put some of your ideas into the chat. Oh, my puppy has things to add. Sorry about that.
Okay, so it was easier to respond to the text if you had a prompt to get started. So you said it felt like I was doing higher level thinking.
Oh, great.
It made you stop and think about things. It's helpful, but it needed some thinking time. Yeah, maybe there wasn't enough thinking time for this.
Sure.
It helped me stay focused and on task and the task at hand and not wander into other thoughts when it was my turn to talk, because there's something right there for you to start with. Yep, it was a good starter.
Mhm.
I need more practice using them, but I love this activity for students. I think it will help them expand their speaking abilities when talking about complex ideas.
Mhm.
Good way to start to spark discussion. And the prompts are more challenging than just the who, what, where questions. They require deeper thinking.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, I appreciate all of those ideas. I have a couple students who, because typically I teach an intermediate class, but because I am the only online class in my program in the morning, my class has expanded to be, much higher level as well. And one of my students who's super articulate has thanked me for the sentence starters. And this is somebody who's, scores both on reading and the listening on the CASAs are super high, but she really appreciated those sentence starters. And I agree, I really like them. And I also found it really powerful to be able to name to have permission to name the things that I don't know yet, the things that I'm not quite sure that I understand. And so I think that this has been a helpful starting place for my students. And they, and I find that for me, I know that something has been successful when I see it leak into places where I'm not using it. So one of the comments about making connections, the language, my students, are able to use some of their own language in place of the prompts, but they started making, telling me about a connection they saw between two texts when I hadn't asked them to do this thinking. And I was really happy to see that. But I do really like the structure and the framework, because some of us, we need it more than others. And also it's a great way to structure a conversation and to structure something going on in a breakout room. So to begin with, that's a lot of information. There's 4 of these strategies, or 4 of these practices. So I have only, focused on one at a time. And, so we'll read this, I'll show them, I broke it down into segments. We read it a couple times, and then I would just put the strategy up here on the screen with it and give them the opportunity to have all of that information there. We did this all together. We did it for this text, and I will keep doing it with this summarizing one, probably 1 or 2 more times before I add a new one. And we'll focus on just one at a time before I give them a choice in that, with everything, starting slowly, building up, do whatever is right for your students. But I have found that starting slowly was a really helpful way to do it. So here's the next piece, and same idea. Yeah, I see somebody about rewriting, and absolutely, I haven't rewritten them yet. I got this from the program we went to this summer, this Standards in Action 2.0, and this is the way I received them. And so I've been reluctant to change them, and I'm not sure why. But as I was setting things up for this workshop, I thought that's really silly. I can change them. And so yes, I would rewrite them and make them a little simpler. I mean, in some way, there was one of them that said, talking about the related content, which is not a word I would use. It might be an okay time to introduce that, but that really depends on you and your learners and where you are and what the goals are. Again, I think that the more we are really, what I like about focusing on standards is it helps me focus on what is my goal? What am I trying to do? And maybe I'm trying to do 3 things at once. Maybe I'm trying to introduce that word content in a subtle way. Or maybe that's going to get in the way of my learners. So being aware of what you're trying to do and why, and also adapting when needed, to say, oh, that language was too challenging for my students at this moment. Let me back up and try something again. Also, that's also how teaching goes, right? That's real life. So, we've read the text, we read it, we maybe looked at pictures, maybe we looked at did the WordCloud activity in the beginning. We've done some of these metacognitive practices. Absolutely, I've got text-dependent questions to add in here that I use, because there's a lot this is a pretty complex text. There's a lot of things that with more digging, my students uncovered. But I'd also then come back to our WordCloud because we have it. And also there are so many things that we have done and could do with this. So what can you do? Well, ask students to choose a word, tell somebody what it means. Ask students to choose a word and make it into a sentence, or 2 words, make a sentence about, and I asked them to write about the text. What did you learn in the text? Use these words. Sometimes in the past, when I've just given them the text itself and asked them to summarize or write about the text, they want to copy. And that's totally reasonable. By having the word cloud, they've got the words, they've got the important words that they can spell, they can remember, they can choose the ones that they really understand, but they don't get to aren't tempted by just copying. And sometimes some of my students, they just remember a sentence and they write that sentence. And if they remember it, that's awesome. That's the level where they are, that's great. Or for my students that are more advanced and are able to do more complex sentences, great, write a couple sentences. Or, I have them both orally or in writing, do a summary, retell the important parts of the story. There's lots to do. And the second time we now see the word cloud, people are a little bit more familiar with it, a little bit more comfortable with it. And also, really now are beginning to understand, because I would explain again that those really big words are in the text more frequently. So those are the ones that really count more. They are the ones that are telling us this is more what the text is about. So this has been a really great new thing in my toolbox. One more way to that my students and I really like engaging with the text is something called multi-voice reading. And, I'm not sure why, but reading fluency isn't one of the CCRS, isn't in the CCRS, but we know that it is super important. I was also at the workshop, the take and bake yesterday about the GED, and Debbie Fawcett was talking about how important fluency is in getting ready for the GED. So at all levels, reading fluency is really important, because the more smoothly and fluidly we can read things, the more we will understand it. So this is a great activity, working with students, getting them to get the words in their mouths and become more engaged in a text. So I also find that it reinforces some of the rhythm of a text and the rhythm of the language, and it builds confidence with my students as well. So in a moment, we're going to need 4 volunteers who will read aloud. So if you're ready to unmic, hit your microphone button and have your voice heard, I would love 4 volunteers to read out loud. Put your name in the chat or say, I want to read. And Patsy will sign a part for you. So put it in the chat, and Patsy will do that. The way this is going to work, so first we'll need 4 volunteers. So write a message in the chat, and for everybody who is, whether you are listening or whether you are doing the actual, oops, I lost my screen here for a minute. Oops, there it is. Sorry. What I want you to pay attention to is this. What does the text sound like, and what do the words feel like? So that's more a question for the people who are doing the speaking, but what do the words feel like in your mouth? So Patsy, do we have 4 people?
We do indeed. We have Sue-Ann, Penny, Carlin, and Jill.
Awesome.
So how about Sue-Ann, if you'll be the person who reads what's in bold? And Penny Brown, if you'll read what is in italics? And Carlin, if you'll read what is underlined? And Jill, if you can read the plain text.
Awesome. Thank you so much, volunteers. So I'll put the text up on the screen. It's 2 pages, so we'll go through both of the pages. I'd love to hear how it goes for all of you. And thank you so much. Here we go.
Hoarding is when you buy and store lots of things you think you might need.
People hoard for different reasons.
During the pandemic, people worry about not having enough of what they need.
So they decide to stock up on certain items.
Hoarding spreads.
If you see other people doing it, you think that you better do it too.
You don't want to be left out.
It turns out hoarding is contagious, just like the virus.
As a society, we pay a high price for hoarding, especially during a pandemic.
Experts say that we should wear a mask.
Wash our hands.
And clean the items we touch, like our phones.
Consequently, people start panic buying.
They hoard hand sanitizer, gloves, and masks.
It's hard to find things we need.
Like toilet paper and bleach.
Now some people are storing a lot of these items.
And other people don't have any.
If some people can't follow the public health rules, that puts everyone at risk.
Yeah. There we go.
Panic buying and hoarding is bad for society in other ways too.
It puts stress on store employees who have to restock shelves.
Also, hoarding makes prices go up.
Even if you find the item you need, you might not be able to afford it.
If you can't get what you need, you feel despair.
We could do better.
We could look out for our neighbors by not buying more than we need.
Think of the sadness on a mother's face when she can't provide for her family.
Let's come together and make this world a better place, even through a pandemic.
Think about how we can give a helping hand.
By sharing with our brothers and sisters.
Not hoarding.
You all are awesome. Thank you. That's great. So before you hit your microphone button again, what do you think? How did that feel as the readers to do that?
It told me how to read. I mean, bold is supposed to be bold. I said it strongly.
Awesome. That's great.
I liked that I didn't always have to read a whole sentence, or I only had to read one sentence.
Great.
It helped create meaningful phrases.
Great.
It felt like the reader's theater.
So
it's more dramatic.
Yeah. Well, thanks for playing along. I really appreciate it. And I think that, I've done this with my students. We usually have done an echo reading before this, so it's not the first time that they have the words in their mouths. Again, you know your students, you know the text, but they really, really like it. And we never really have enough time for them to do it enough. So I've done it a lot, like we just did it with people volunteering, but I think what I'm going to try next is to send people into breakout rooms after we do it together and let them do it on their own. And if we had more time today, I would have had you all doing it in your breakout rooms as well, but I wanted to throw it at you and let you experience it in all these ways. So again, that's been a really big hit, and my students ask to do it more. I know that some people have talked about, can we do it with different colors of text? Of course, absolutely. Whatever works for you. I also really like teaching my students about italics and bold and underlined text, because I've tried that before. Italics comes up in exercises, in grammar exercises, or in a text. We'll see it, and they haven't always been able to differentiate. So this is sort of it's a side goal of this activity, is becoming both more familiar with the names of these things. I teach them to say bold and italics and underlined and plain, and then it's also training their eye to differentiate. So all of those are kind of a great thing. So these were the objectives we set up at the beginning, and we really hope that by now, now you have some more ideas for preparing learners for reading a text, more ways to engage learners in a variety of reading experiences, and to enrich your lessons with CCRS-based activities. So would love to hear, thinking about your off-the-shelf resource, whatever it is that you typically grab, how would you use these or adapt these activities to help prepare your learners? So if you want to share a word or so in the chat of what you would like to try, would love to hear it.
Well, we already have one person saying that they're going to use this right away on Monday.
Awesome.
The 4 voices.
Yeah. Oh, the word cloud, there is a link in the document, the document that you had for your breakout. There's a link to the free, how to make a free word cloud. I forget what the name of it is. And one of the things I really like about it, there are a couple of things. One is that all of the words come out horizontal, which is really nice, especially in an online, since I'm not giving paper to my students, they don't have to tip their head and read things sideways. And also you can limit how many words you show. So this word cloud had a lot of words, and I backed it up a bit so that it's not quite as overwhelming for some of the texts that we've used. So that's an option. And also you can look and see how many times a word shows up in a text. I really like that feature, that I can say, oh, this is in there 7 times, or this is in there 12 times, whatever it is. It's kind of cool. That's awesome.
What was the word cloud program? We have it linked in the document, I believe.
I think it's called Free Word Cloud, or Free Word Cloud Generator. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Mentimeter we used at the beginning, but the one that Liddy used has an option to make them all horizontal or adding colors.
That's it, Patsy. Thank you.
Patsy.
Yep, the Free Word Cloud Generator. The Mentimeter doesn't work for this kind of making the word cloud for the text, but the Mentimeter is great for those survey kind of thing. Oh, good. It looks like people found lots of things here that are useful. This is awesome.
It's great to see.
That's the end. We are so glad that you spent the end, right up to the edge of Friday, this corner of Friday afternoon with us. We are here for a couple more minutes if you have questions or want to talk or anything else. But otherwise, thank you so much. Don't forget your evaluation. Get your CEUs. Dan, any last words?
Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you at next year's L&L.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Dan and Liddy. If you could find your reactions in your Zoom and give them a round of applause. I feel like that's a good way to end the conference. You could also turn your camera on and wave at each other. I put a link to the camera, to the flyer. That's how you'll find oh, we got hearts too. How fun. So the evaluation in CEU, thanks Rob for dropping that. I'll pause the recording, but you don't have to leave.